Okay, as I was kind of looking through my notes to kind of prepare and everything, we sort of started our introduction to the book of James back in March. That's almost well, it's basically 4 months ago. It was the end of March. So 4 months ago we went through the introduction, and then let's see, back in the beginning of May, we started into the first chapter. And is there anybody in here that remembers everything that we covered? Is there anybody in here that remembers anything that we covered?
Yeah, I remember some of it.
Some of it, okay. I think it'd be worth our time to go through a few of those things a little bit quicker than what we did. Yeah.
The one thing, John, I remember, I've tried very hard to remember, is the count it all joy when you fall into various trials.
Yeah.
It's the idea of calm delight.
Calm delight is what.
I remember this. So every time I'm going through something difficult, I'm thinking, am I doing this with calm delight?
And one of the things I wanted to ask today is, has anybody remembered that? And what does that do for your approach when we change things? I mean, because what did I say? How do I approach it? Unfortunately, if I'm not doing the right thing, do you remember?
Well, like me, you get frustrated, right?
Yeah, get frustrated, and James's approach builds what? Joy.
Yeah.
That's what he says. Joy. Count it all joy. And my approach of, anger and everything else builds what? Do you remember what I said? It builds resentment. Okay, it builds resentment at having to struggle through whatever this thing is again that I'm having to struggle with. Okay, so I don't think about it all the time, but I have thought about it a number of times. Calm delight, calm delight, calm delight. It's like counting to 10, but you say calm delight 20 times, and the change in that approach, the change in that approach gives us a different perspective, and it's perspective that is going to help us deal with the things that we have to deal with in our Christian living and everything. So I'm glad that helped. I'm glad I stumbled across that in Strong's, because it probably hit me at the right time, and maybe it hit you at the right time too. So how many Calm Delight episodes did you have on 6,600 miles of driving out west? Yeah, not answering.
Most of it was good.
Yeah.
We did take a couple wrong turns.
Yeah. Okay. So the book of James, and so I kind of subtitled it Christian Living. I didn't think that up. That's what the book seems to be about. And we've gone over the author, the context in which it was written, the date, the subject, and other miscellaneous stuff. And this is kind of the outline of how I'm going to approach things. But later on, I noticed there's another slide on here that says outline, and it's when we really get into the body of the text is what that one is talking about. So, author James, and how many people did we say? Do you remember this? That might be 4 that I can definitely identify. And I saw somebody say there might be 5, and then somebody else said there might be 6. And so there's either 4 or 5 or 6 people named James in the Bible. And it's the anglicized version of Jacob, is what kind of the name is. So, and of the 4 of them that are out there, 5 of them, 6 of them, the father of Judas, one mention, son of Alphaeus, mentioned a number of times, might be James the Less Run, and I have a little bit of a non-meeting of the minds about James the Less, James the Greater. So it's not a quite chiseled in stone sort of thing. Even if they found it chiseled in stone somewhere, it probably wouldn't tell you anything. Okay, and so there are times you just have to infer from what is there to pinpoint something down, and sometimes you go into historians that are almost contemporary or just after, maybe, to put together a piece that, we're here at about 99% that this is the brother of the Lord, not the son of Zebedee and brother of John. What happened to him?
He was
Beheaded. Okay, and the book was written after that. So James, the brother of the Lord, and James the Just is also now one of the historians definitely I'm almost certain calls him this, James the Just. Maybe Hegesippus.
Is that why, because they considered it the pillar of the church of Jerusalem? That's why he got that title.
Yeah. And even respected so much by the Jews that, I mean, this is the James that let's see. Hegesippus is the first of the historians to mention him. Says he spent so much time kneeled in prayer in the temple courts that his knees became calloused like that of a camel. I've talked about that before. And he also reports that scribes and Pharisees took James to a wing of the temple and demanded he, in effect, recant his faith. When he refused, they pushed him off the temple, stoned him, and beat out his brains with a club. Buried on the spot. And let's see. And then Josephus, in mentioning this, says these things happened to the Jews, basically the overthrow of Jerusalem, okay, by Vespasian, invaded Judea. These things happened to Jews to avenge James the Just, who was the brother of him that is called Christ, and whom the Jews had slain, notwithstanding his preeminent justice. So even the Jews had such a high amount of respect for him that when this happened, okay, it was interpreted widely as, hey, we're getting our just desserts here in terms of, being invaded again by the Romans and destroyed because of what they've done to James. So kind of an early kind of a karma sort of thing. What goes around comes around, that kind of a thing. Okay. And then to whom it was written, it very plainly says in the first two, the 12 tribes that are dispersed abroad. Again, not addressed to the local Jews, because the local Jew, James is right there. Okay, he would have been able to tell these same things to the local Jews, and really Jews to the Christians is who he's really writing to. And I kind of come to that conclusion is because if he was writing to Jews in order to convert them, what would be the tone of the book?
Jesus' prophecy concerning Christ.
That's right. Jesus lived. Hey, he might even have said, I am his brother. That's not in there. The things about the cross and resurrection, there's no proof stuff in there to convince a Jew that Jesus is the Christ. There's an awful lot of good teaching that anyone would understand, okay? But because of this idea of who it's written to and everything else, and the types of things that are in there.
The recipients of the letter already knew all these things.
That's right.
The things before.
The gospel sorts of things.
They knew all that stuff. Now they needed to live right.
Yeah. You're right. So what he is answering for them, hey, you've been converted.
Right.
Now, what are you going to do about it?
Application.
How do you live about it? And that's the subtitle, Christian living. The Christian living. How are you going to live about it? So, and then date thought to be one of the earlier letters written. There's no mention of the Council of Jerusalem. Earliest manuscripts mid-3rd century, so not terribly long after. Council of Jerusalem was around 50 AD, and none of the issues that surround that council, this is Acts 15, okay, none of the issues that are mentioned in that are mentioned in the letter at all, which kind of reinforces the idea that this would have happened before AD 50, because if those issues had been out there, then they would have been discussed. They would have been needed to be discussed.
So sometime between Acts 9 and Acts 15.
Right.
I mean, because, the scattering of the people.
That's right.
And now help address the problems that.
Yeah. Now, I mean, naturally, the Jews were the early adopters of Christianity. Some of the Jews were the early adopters. That's obvious enough. And then you get into Acts 10, Cornelius, that whole issue of Peter coming back and having to defend himself to say, look, if these people have got the same gift as what we've got, in these circumstances, who am I to stand in the way and tell God it can't happen?
Right.
Well, he was nobody to stand in God's way, and he recognized that. So, okay, so the subject is practical matters, how to live your life so you can be pleasing. Hebrews is, what's the theme of Hebrews? Just the general topic of Hebrews.
Christ
More like Galatians. Don't go back.
Yeah.
You foolish Galatians. You foolish Hebrews. What are you doing? Abandoning this thing that's so much better. Look at how much better there's a better priest, a better services, just everything is so much better. Why would you go back to that old way of thinking? Okay, and that's that's the big contrast. I think is that it's about don't go back. This is hey, how to live, and then some of the miscellaneous stuff. 108 verses, half of which have some sort of an imperative. Do this. Do not do this, let this happen, those sorts of things. I've been called the Proverbs of the New Testament. The construction is similar in terms of wisdom. It's almost like the New Testament wisdom literature. The word gospel doesn't appear. Okay, we kind of talked about that just a little bit. Only a couple references to Jesus. I meant to redo this so you could see a little better. But the idea is the first column, or the third column over really, is the subject matters that are covered by Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. The second column to that is the reference in Matthew 5, 6, and 7 where that subject matter is covered. And then the first column is where James covers the same sort of a thing. Okay, and this is from Nelson's Complete Book of Bible Maps and Charts. But the idea is that James really understood what his brother's teaching was. Very familiar with it. Okay, so that's what we did back in March. Any questions about that so far? Pretty clear? Okay, here's another outline of James. And this is how we're going to kind of cover the material that's in it. So first part of the first chapter is the test of faith, and we'll cover some of those things. Then we'll go into the characteristics of faith. Faith obeys. Faith is trustworthy. Faith does not discriminate. Those sorts of things. And then at the end, the trial of faith. So the body of it is in those 4 chapters. The bulk of it is in those 4 middle parts. The bulk of it is in that center part. Okay, then we went over the purpose of tests. So, the first thing he's going to tell them, hey, tests are going to come. It's going to happen. Don't be surprised when it shows up. As he introduces this, he says, a bondservant of God and the Lord Jesus Christ. This is one of the few times they actually even mentions Jesus in the whole thing. But to the 12 tribes dispersed abroad, and again, I think that's basically written to Christians that are out in other places. The Greek word being used in there is diaspora. Sometimes you even still hear that word used. Kind of after World War II. And the Jews were in all these other countries, and they tried to set up the nation of Israel. I mean, did in 1947 finally, but a lot of Jews from other places came back to the Promised Land and set up a national state, political state of Israel. So, but he calls himself a bondservant. The word there is the doulos, which kind of means in bondage. And we said the other word for slave or servant is. Remember this, the Greek word? Diakonos, deacon. Okay, so there's deacon and there's doulos. The one, it has a little bit more of an implication of a voluntary act of service, whereas the other is more of a mandatory thing. Now, he uses the mandatory one when he says here a bondservant, but it's almost in the sense of, I couldn't see any other way to do this.
Right.
Knowing what I know. How could I not put myself in voluntary, absolute servitude to my master?
My conscience compels me.
That's right. Given what I know, there's no other way I can act. So I think he uses it maybe the stronger word because of that. So let's see. Okay, then we can This is 2 and 3. Consider it all joy, and this is where we were talking earlier. The calm delight. When you encounter various trials, and the testing of your faith produces endurance. And so, the whole point of these tests that we come across is endurance. So we're going to talk about the nature of those tests a little bit later. And then we talked about Moses considering it joy in the sense of leaving what he could have had in Egypt,
Right.
okay, and instead counting it a better thing to do to suffer with his own people from where he was from. And so out into, he's 40, right? And then he leaves for 40 years.
Yeah.
And then comes back and kind of wanders for 40 years. And 80 years of that would have been much less pleasant than what he could have had if he'd have stayed. But it was, the trials were something that were better off. And things that produced endurance or steadfastness in him. And the ultimate goal in verse 4, let endurance have its perfect result, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. And so it's not, the point of endurance is so that you can endure. The point of these trials is to build endurance so that you can go on and become what God wants you to be, wants every one of us to be, and has an expectation of what we can be because he knows us as well as he does. And so that's the idea of spiritual maturity. And so we're talking about somebody with the characteristics of Job, right? And the description of Job in 1-1, blameless, upright, fearing God, turning away from evil. Okay, that's what that's kind of the perspective that we're looking for. In verses 5 through 8, he mentions another purpose is about developing wisdom. Okay, if you lack wisdom, and all of us do at times, ask of God. God will give us wisdom. Remember the ways we talked about God can give us wisdom? I mean, one of the ways is tests and trials. Okay.
One was here.
Yeah.
His work.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Thy word is truth.
Right.
Okay. And the idea of wisdom, knowledge of what is true or right, coupled with just judgment as to action. So it has to show itself in action, how to behave. Okay. If it just stops with I have a great understanding, but I never act on that understanding, then I'm not showing wisdom. I'm only showing knowledge. Wisdom is one step above knowledge. So coupled with just judgment as to action, how to act. Okay, so God is the source of it, and He'll give generously if we ask for it, as much as we can stand. Okay, and He certainly has the ability to do it. It says, ask in faith without doubting. Okay, without any doubting whatsoever, because if you ask but you doubt God's ability to give it to you, you're a double-minded person.
Right.
Okay, you're holding irrational thoughts. And James says, he who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. A double-minded man, in verse 8, unstable. Okay, and so that's obviously something that we do not want to do. Okay, and then okay, 9 through 12, the purpose of tests, and this is where we started. That's okay. This is where we've been. Okay, now we're starting new material. We good with where we are so far? Any questions or comments? Okay, so verses 9 through 12, and let me read them. But let the brother of humble circumstances glory in his high position, and let the rich man glory in his humiliation. Because like flowering grass, he will pass away. For the sun rises with a scorching wind, and so withers the grass, and its flower falls off, and the beauty of its appearance is destroyed. So too the rich man, in the midst of his pursuits, will fade away. Blessed is a man who perseveres in a trial, for once he's been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. And so James is kind of, let's go back and look at this idea of endurance again. Okay? He's going to reintroduce this, and he says endurance, and he's going to talk about it really in the face of poverty and affluence. So poverty he calls humble circumstances. We can understand that. What's man's perspective on somebody of humble means? Society. What is society's perspective when they see somebody, who basically doesn't have any money or is a very poor person?
Kind of look down on them.
Yeah, and why is that?
It could be a very degree of reasons. I mean, they figure the person's there.
We assume they're responsible for it.
Yeah.
There you go. We do make the assumption that, and guess what? It can be a pretty good assumption, right?
Yeah.
You have somebody out there who's a junkie who spends all their money on heroin
Yeah.
and has to break into people's homes to avoid their habit, although they can go to the needle exchange program across from John's place downtown now so that so they can at least get clean needles to
Yeah, right.
to do this, and we get to pay for it out of our own pockets somehow, one way or another. But we see the person who has pursued that, and they do deserve that poverty that they've got. And there are very wealthy people in this world who have followed that road and end up in the same gutter. Okay? So it can be a completely rational
Right.
explanation of why somebody is in humble circumstances. They may have brought it on themselves. When they were in high school, did they pay attention? Or were they fooling around the whole time? Okay. If they had an opportunity to go to college, did they make a rational decision about whether to do that or not? Or did they just fritter it away because, there wasn't enough of a party lifestyle at the school? You can find colleges now that, rankings of colleges based on how big of a party school they are. They've been doing that for 20 or 30 years, actually. And kids choose based on that. Well, if mom and dad have really deep pockets and no sense themselves, you may not end up in the gutter. Okay? But that's society's perspective on why somebody is of humble circumstances, or
But it's not always that way.
it's not always that way, though. Okay, and we've got to rightly discern.
Yeah.
Okay, now God brings us our wealth. There's no doubt about it. Anything you've got from God. Okay, that we've got to recognize that. Okay, which means that God has entrusted us with a certain number of things. Okay, knowing what was best for us. Let's just put it that way. God knows what's best for us. He will provide. For some he provides more, and some he provides less. For the person that he provides less to, does he do that so that they'll fall away or reject him? Does he do it knowing that this person can handle poverty? Okay, I think he does it knowing that person can handle that. What about poor health? I mean, that's just another form of affluence, isn't it?
Right.
Okay? God give it to you to chase you away? God give it to you to convince you to search him out, seek him and find him. Those who diligently seek him will find him. Okay? So for some people, it may be that God decides that humble circumstances are the way that he will draw them to himself. Okay? For another person, let's see. In a sense, it's because I know this man will remain faithful in spite of poverty. I'll make him poor so he can be a good example to others, and his reward in heaven is going to be all that much greater. You think of any Bible examples of that?
You're referring to Lazarus, the rich man?
Lazarus. Yeah, what about Lazarus? Look, Lazarus suffered in his life and yet was faithful, and now he's going to be rewarded. Okay. The rich man?
But on the other hand, God, through his, I thought of the verse in Romans 2, where it says, through his riches he calls you to repentance. That rich man, given all the riches, is still calling him to repentance through all the riches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Now, what is the trial for the person who is of humble circumstances? For the person that's sitting there, it's like, man, I just can't make a living. I'm really struggling right now. What's the trial that God is giving them? What's He asking that person to do?
Trust in Him.
Depend on me. You depend on me, I'll take care of it. It's going to be all right. If it's, the old song, Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? My friends all drive Porsches. I must make amends. Is that how it goes?
I don't know.
Maybe Ron and I are the only ones that are old enough to remember that. You guys remember that song at all? No? Who sang that? Whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. But if that's your purpose in life is, Lord, give me a Mercedes-Benz, He's probably not going to do it. Okay, probably not going to do it. You may still find your way, over there doing that, but it won't be because you're following God's guidance in your life. And there's nothing wrong with having a Mercedes-Benz, okay? That's not the point. The point is putting that in front of God is what is the problem, okay? And so the affluent man has to watch out for that, doesn't he? So, but that test of poverty to that person of humble circumstances can be we can approach it with society's mindset and end up answering or asking ourselves the question, why doesn't God love me? Okay, and I think that's probably the test or the trial of poverty is, I work hard, God must not be taking a notice of me. God must not be blessing me. I must not be pleasing to God. And that also may be true. We have to take care of that. Okay. But if that becomes our mindset, I'm here because of this, then that poverty itself kind of becomes the trial. Okay. And that person needs to get over that. We need to get over that. Okay. So, and a lot of times it's the comparison with others, and this is talked about in the scriptures and other places. We can always find somebody who's a worse sinner than us to make us feel good about what we're doing. Okay? And so much of society is completely wrapped up in that. Oh, that's all right. You didn't really mean to rob that bank and kill those people. I mean, so far we're not there on bank robbery yet, but
Not far.
yeah, we're not far sometimes. Okay, because it's a pat on the back and. Yes, if you're not happy with your gender, then we'll force other people to call you by a different gender. We will make them lie so you do not feel bad. I was reading an article yesterday up at the University of Minnesota, and they have passed a law. It's basically that right there. And if you do not call somebody by their preferred gender pronoun, and there's like 28 of them to choose from. I don't know if you're supposed to wear a sign.
Yeah, I was going to say, how would you know?
How would you know? I know. How would you know? I guess maybe if they tell you, and you forget later on, staff, faculty, students, you can be charged and kicked out of the university for not lying to somebody. Okay? You're not a woman. That's where our society is going. That's a scary, scary thing. Because nobody can force you to tell a lie. But that's exactly what you're doing. Okay, so there's trials for this humble man. What does it take to overcome those trials? This idea that God doesn't love me. It takes knowledge that God does love you. Okay, that's what is going to help you overcome that, is to understand, no, in spite of my circumstance, okay, God loves me. Jesus did not have a pillow for his head. Okay, does it say but a stone? I think. Paul, hey, I've learned to be happy no matter what my circumstance is. Boy, I mean, it makes you kind of tingle thinking, well, I fall short. I need to work on that more. So, okay, so we've got the poor man here in some humble circumstances, but we've got the affluent man too, the rich man. Okay, man's perspective on the rich man, society's perspective on this rich person.
He must be right with God.
Boy.
Look how great he's doing.
Yeah. God must be happy because he's blessed him. And so you've got the, what do they call the gospel of wealth or something, John?
Health and wealth, right?
Yeah, the health and wealth gospel.
Prosperity.
Prosperity gospel. It goes by several names. God wants you to be rich.
Yep.
Okay, define rich. Because if you're talking about material wealth, then that's an absolute lie. It's just an absolute lie. Okay? But that's how they appeal to people, right? What's the word? Greed. You're appealing with greed and putting a good face on greed so that people will show up. And so, that's one of the things that the health and wealth gospel might lead to a megachurch, but that megachurch may not have anything to do with what God's word actually says.
Right.
But people aren't looking for that.
Leads to prosperity for the person who's preaching.
Yeah. I mean, you saw in the last month or so, this gospel guy, I need a bigger jet.
Need a bigger jet.
Remember that? I need a bigger jet, so I can jet all around, spread the gospel to everybody.
Friends have bigger jets. I need a bigger jet. Right?
Yeah. Other preachers have bigger jets. So there's always this idea, we can always compare ourselves to this person over here, and I'm not as bad of a sinner as them. Well, my standard's Jesus, though. I can keep my eye on that. I can keep improving myself there if my standard is that. If my standard's down here in the gutter, I don't need to work on myself at all. Okay? Well, this needs to be my standard way up here. So, okay. So society looks at the rich man. Boy, it would be great to be rich. It would be fantastic to be rich. You wouldn't have any worries at all. That's society's perspective. I think we all agree with that. We always think, oh, it'd be so much easier if we were rich.
One of the devil's biggest lies, right?
You bet it is. Because the rich people have problems just like the rest of us. They absolutely do. And in fact, they've probably got more problems.
More friends, right?
Huh?
They have more friends, right?
Yeah, friends, right? More friends. What's God's perspective? The poor man, he's looking forward to the end of life. Why? It's going to be over. I'm going to be with God. All these trials are gone. Okay? Things are going to be much better for him. How about the rich man? What's his perspective? Is he going to leave all of his wealth to a fool? And it's wasted? Solomon talks about that, doesn't he?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay?
This is an evil thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, if you look at the comforts of life, and your focus stays on the comforts of life, okay, that rich man may seem to be quite happy. Okay? But when he looks at the other things, what are the things that he gave up in order to become that rich person? Does he know who his children are? Do they know who he is? Is he in a terrible marriage, or is he in a good marriage, or is he in a terrible fifth marriage? Okay, those are the things that rich, that financially well-off person, those are the things that they may end up dealing with.
Well, I think to a certain degree they deal with the idea of eternity too, because God put eternity in man's heart.
Yes.
It's there.
Yep.
Whether you hide it, shut
Yep.
it off into a closet, never look at it.
Yeah.
It's always there.
You can acknowledge it or not, but
right.
that does not change its existence.
That's right.
Okay? And I think is that Ecclesiastes 12 or something like that? 12:1?
Yeah.
God has set eternity in the heart of man,
Yeah.
and yet from the beginning man has not been able to understand.
I'm not sure if it's all one, but
Yeah.
it's in Ecclesiastes.
Okay, yeah. It's a great verse. It's a great little passage, and there's more to it than just that and everything. So he has all these things that he's going to do, and Solomon did all these things with his wealth. Okay, but in the end, it's basically what Job said: "Naked I came into this world from my mother's womb, and at the end,
That's the way
I'm leaving it all behind." Okay, and so there's that. Now what? That is this cloud hanging over you. Who's heard of the sword of Damocles? Recognize this? I think I may have talked about this one time. There was a very wealthy king. Cicero, I think, is the one that writes about this from what I remember when I was reading about it. Cicero writes this kind of a moral story, and I think he's just putting into words something that was out there. So I don't think he's responsible for it. But supposedly this king, very, very wealthy, very, very powerful. And yet he had like a court jester or something like that was there to kind of pat him on the back and tell him wonderful things about himself and everything else. He says something along the lines of, it's got to be so wonderful. It's got to be so wonderful to have all the wealth and the power that you've got. And the king says to him, and the man's name, this court jester kind of guy, his name is Damocles. And the king says, hey, you want to trade for a day? And he jumps at it. And so he's had for the next day or so, while they've traded places, the Damocles is being fed with all kinds of luscious foods and, the pleasures of life and people to wait on him and everything else and recline on the couch and just thinking it's all great. Then he looks up and realizes, hey, there's a sword up there. And it's dangling by the thread of a horsehair. And it's right over my head. And kind of comes to the realization that power is fleeting. And it could end just that fast, at any minute. And he kind of quickly gets up and says, I think I've had enough. I understand. And so that's Damocles and the sword of Damocles, and the idea that power's there, but it could end very, very quickly. If you are in a position of power, it can end overnight, okay, in an instant. And we read all kinds of things in the Bible about just that very thing happening. So the book of Daniel comes to mind just kind of right away with the Medes and the Persians. Wealth is the same sort of thing for that affluent person. Okay, does the poor man? He knows he can survive poverty. He's been doing it every day. Okay, the rich man, can I survive that or not? And chances are, having known all the advantages of wealth, if it was all taken away, what position would they be in? Okay? That's the test to the person of affluence. The poor man, we said he could overcome this test of poverty with knowledge and endurance. How's the wealthy man going to overcome this test of wealth? Same thing. Knowledge and endurance. Part of the knowledge is that, hey, this wealth could be fleeting.
The one that came from God.
Yeah. It came from God. God can take it away just that fast.
God's watching you use what he gave.
That's right.
He's watching.
Yeah. So, as a parent, how do you train this understanding into your children?
Well, you exhibit contentment where you're at.
Okay, which is not easy, is it? It's not easy. In our house, one of the ways we do it is, it's all going to burn up. Okay? It's all going to burn up. George is laughing back there. Anastasia's not in here, is she?
Elliot was asking me the other day, we were driving by somebody's house, and he said, is that house going to burn up too?
Little kids hear things, and they don't understand, the broader perspective of how you're going about it. And you mentioned that, hey, it's all going to burn up someday. For Anastasia, when's it going to burn up? We'll go out to the house and working on it. When's it going to burn up? Well, Anastasia, you get into this 15-minute explanation, and all you're doing is digging yourself a hole, So, but, the reminder needs to be out there. Hey, we have these things because God has blessed us. Okay? Other people don't have these things, and we try to help those people when we see a legitimate need. Those are the things we say to our children, that we need to say to our children, so that they understand. Okay, that this is temporary. They need to understand that. So no matter what, you're going to have to overcome, some of these trials, and depending on what just like looking at that person who's the terrible sinner and Jesus, comparing yourself the right way. If we compare ourselves to the person who's in abject poverty, we're probably a lot more likely to be satisfied with our own circumstances. Okay? If we always are comparing ourselves to the person who is fabulously wealthy, okay, what are we going to start doing?
Yeah. Feel sorry for yourself.
Yeah, feel sorry. But what are the words? for that. The word is escaping me right now. I'm asking you guys, help me with the word. Greed, but there's also covetousness. Okay, is that how you say that? Covetousness. Okay, but that sort of thing is like you look at the person with the Mercedes-Benz. Oh boy, life would be great. Well, no, they got the problems. Those Mercedes-Benz break also. Not very often, but when they do break, boy, they're expensive to fix.
Will often rust destroy them too, right?
That's right. That's right. And we need to say that to ourselves. Hey, moth and rust. And I will tell you, the more physical things that you have, it just means the more they're going to break.
The more things you have, the more things to break.
That's right. And so you spend all your time fixing those things that break. So, now, if I had all the money to hire somebody to do it, my life would be great, right?
You're going the wrong way.
Yeah, that's right. But that is how we tend to think of those things, okay? And I'm saying that's the mindset we have to fight.
That's the American dream.
Yeah. He who dies what? With the most toys wins. That's what our society teaches, okay? It's just wrong. It's just wrong. Okay. So, okay. Let's see. Okay. Back to verse 12 here. Blessed is a man who perseveres in a trial, for once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. This idea of the crown of life. There's two different Greek words for crown. One of them is diadem. Okay? Crown him with many crowns. Okay? Diadem. That's a crown of authority or power or rulership. Okay? There's another crown that comes from the idea of something that is woven, like an olive leaf crown, the crown in the games. You didn't win the crown of rulership, it's a crown of victory. Okay? That's the woven crown of olive branches, that kind of a thing. And that word is Stephanos. We get the name Stephen from that. So the intertwined olive leaf or the crown of thorns. Okay? Crown of thorns on Jesus, not a crown of rulership, a crown of victory. Okay? What's more important? The victory. The victory. That's what he's talking about here. Persevere under trial, for once you've been approved, you will receive a crown of victory, a crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. So, we've got time, not a lot of time here, but look at verse 12 and tell me how many refutations of tulip, Calvinism, total hereditary depravity, unconditional election, okay, limited atonement, irresistible grace, perseverance, or preservation of the saints. How many refutations of tulip can you find just in that one verse? And what are they? Anybody see any right away?
Perseverance of the saints, preservation of the saints. Blessed are those who remain steadfast under trial.
Right. And so it does talk about persevering here, but is the persevering here the same as the persevering in Calvin? No. They're completely different things. Okay? This is to persevere under trial. Calvin, tulip, you don't have to persevere at all. Okay? No matter what you do, God will preserve you. Is the Calvinist teaching. They're different things. What's another one? What's that?
Stood the test.
Stood the test, okay? Does the irresistible grace of tulip allow us to fail when we're under trial? Irresistible grace?
Under their thinking, no.
Yeah, well, no, but for us it needs to.
Yeah.
But for them, no.
For them, no. Yeah.
No, I don't have to.
That's right.
God chose me no matter what I'm going to do.
Grace is
I
given no matter what.
I don't have to persevere under trial according to the Calvinist thought process.
Right.
I don't have to persevere. God picked me.
Right.
I don't have to do anything now. In fact, I can do anything.
That's not the way this is stated.
That's not the way verse 12. That's not what the Bible says. Okay? okay? But it is the natural extension of what Calvinist teaching is. Another? I found a third one.
God has promised to those who love him.
Okay.
And basically, anyone who loves him and does it is going to be saved by him. It's not a limited atonement.
That's right. And I wrote down, God promises a crown to those who love him, or to those, or does he promise a crown to those who are predestined and unconditionally elected? Well, it says here, promise to those who love him. If you love me, keep my commands. John 14:15 or 15:14, and they both kind of say the same thing in different ways. Okay, that's what the Bible teaches the crown is going to go to. Those who love him. Those who actually do his will. Not a matter of, well, I'm going to do it, now I'm going to earn it. That's not the point. Okay? I'm going to do it because I love him. Because of what he's done for me. And that's a motivation that can outlast these trials that are going to come upon us. So, okay. Any other comments?
With that, do you see how many times it refutes that just in this verse? It comes down to, who's going to believe, John Calvin or Jesus?
Well,
I mean, then it should be a no-brainer.
yeah. Or who are you going to believe, this or me?
Right.
Or any man that's out there teaching? Well, if they conflict, then right here, you got to believe that. So, and so we have to look at anything that anybody says and make sure that we are following the right thing. Okay, close enough to the end. Next week we'll pick up in verse 13, and if today's any indication, we will get to verse 15. We'll try to get all the way through chapter 1 next week. Thank you.